All right. Well, hey, we'll start. Good? Good. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jeff Kless. Appreciate the opportunity to come out tonight and talk about baseball collecting, my baseball hobby that I've been collecting for over 40 years. So I started in 1970. And special thanks to Lorraine for calling me and contacting me to be here at the Troy Historical Society. Pretty interesting facility, a lot of interesting buildings. So if you have a chance to get out here, people watching on the local cable, I definitely would encourage it. Hey, we're going to talk about, here it is right here, the baseball card presentation, October 10th. And what is tonight? Everybody know what's going on tonight?
There's baseball.
It's a baseball game. Big game tonight. Tigers against the Oakland A's, game 4. Starts about 9:37 here local time, so we'll see how that works out here for the Tigers. We've got about, 45 minutes or so to talk about the hobby of sports card collecting, primarily baseball. So that's going to be our emphasis tonight. Just an agenda, we're really going to talk about the history of cards, how they started way back in the 1860s, so it's fitting based upon the buildings that we have here on site. We're going to talk about how to obtain cards, how to collect cards. We're going to talk about both the primary and secondary markets, how to store your collection. That's very important, especially if you've got some of the older cards. We're also going to talk about card values. A lot of people ask me, and I've been doing this for a while, what's the value of my collection? You know, how much is it worth? And we're going to talk through that. I do some card appraisals, and it's quite interesting of what people's perception is of what their collection is worth and what it actually is. It's almost kind of like your blue book in your car. You may say, well, my car blue book's for $9,500, and then when you actually try to sell it, you're lucky to get $6,500. So that's something to think about. Also, the card conditions as well as the current market conditions. Things have changed considerably through the years. We're going to talk through that. Talk briefly, very briefly on some of the other sports. Basketball, of course, hockey here in Hockey Town, as well as football. And also sports memorabilia. A lot of people have a lot of autograph memorabilia. I've got a nice Denny McLain piece. I got an Ernie Harwell piece here tonight. You really need to know who you're buying this type of memorabilia from, and there's a lot of out there, unfortunately, that it's counterfeit, so you got to be really careful what's out there. We're going to go back into time here, and quite interesting, we're going to go back to pre-1900. And before we get started, people out here in the crowd, how many people have card collections? Any sports card collections? None at all? Nothing?
Signed baseball.
Oh, a signed baseball. Who do you have a signed baseball of? Oh, okay. Very nice. Very nice. And what an unbelievable announcer. I mean, just the history and just listening to him broadcast history of all the players that you actually knew back back in the day, as we say. So back in early 1900, it really started, the photography and baseball, of course, was just getting started. And does anyone know who invented baseball out there? Anybody know? A trivia question. First, who invented baseball? Anybody know? Abner Doubleday, that's right. There has been a little bit disputes about that through the years. That's right, very good. So there has been a little dispute about that. I'm originally from Buffalo, New York, and Cooperstown, New York is where the Baseball Hall of Fame is. So out of the people here, how many people have gone to the Baseball Hall of Fame? Oh, we're over. Ooh, you got to go. I mean, seriously, if you have an opportunity, a weekend, you're talking about maybe 8-9 hour drive from here. It's unbelievable. It's in wine country. It's Finger Lake region. It's a great weekend trip. I've been there about 7 times and can really get never enough of it because there's just so much history, but it is a great area. But basically in the 1900s, baseball started, and we started to see some of the local baseball clubs. And this is primarily before the American and National League. So you had a lot of these local teams around the area kind of coming together, kind of like your softball teams that we have today. local teams as baseball was starting to get developed. And these are just some of the pictures I was able to show. You could see some of the older uniforms, and a lot of times the owner, for example, the gentleman here with the hat in the middle would be your owner. He would be the main sponsor of the team, potentially even play on the team. And it was a lot of just some local teams, and of course those folks did not have cars and charter jets as they have now to get around town. For that matter, so most of the teams played local, but they would take kind of like these classic baseball team photographs. You can see some of the uniforms and how, and I have some of the older pictures here as well as on my display here. Anybody familiar with this card at all, or anything familiar with Andrew Peck and Company? Is that a ring a bell at all? This is came out of the sports store in New York City, the Peck and Snyder, and actually these are one of the very first baseball cards that were produced, and really it's kind of the originator of the Peck and Snyder cards. And we're going to kind of go back here a little bit, and we started seeing some of the local businesses promote their businesses utilizing baseball cards, and it was kind of and some were even advertising products that had no connection with baseball. So they would start doing some advertising utilizing baseball players and images. And in 1868, Peck and Snyder began producing trading cards, but they also sold, your typical sporting goods type of store. Kind of interesting, and they produce what they call these team cards. And the Cincinnati Red Stockings, what team is that currently called? Reds. Cincinnati Reds, that's correct, sir. So they had a card 1868 through 8. They were produced over a 3-year period. Also the New York Mutuals had one. Also the Chicago White Stockings in 1870. And also the Philadelphia Athletics, which we, of course, it's really the Oakland Athletics, or A's as we have now. A kind of interesting story here. This was recent, 2009. Bernice out in California found an old baseball card in her antique shop and actually found one of these cards, and it was quite interesting. It actually has a couple of Hall of Famers on the card, Harry and George Wright. A little description I was able to pick up on the actual card itself. They had different backs, and they had some different variations of the card, and it was called the Sepia Photograph. So it's kind of and this is actually the picture of the card. You can see the condition was not absolutely mint condition like you may see in some of the newer cards I bought tonight. But Harry and George Wright are in there, and kind of interesting. The one that she found, 143-year-old card roughly. If you think about it, this one in the same decade Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated, 4 years after the Civil War ended. Kind of neat stuff, 16 years prior to the first gas-powered vehicle. And it actually was purchased for almost over $64,000. So that was quite the find for Bernice out there in California. Here's a nice picture here. These are cards from the old Judge Gypsy Queen cigarettes. And it's kind of a visual photography here, the sepia photography with kind of the clouds, kind of this mystical view. And this is Home Run King Kelly. Anybody remember him at all? He was quite the star back in the day. And you can check out the outfit there with almost a tie look with the collars and the button down. And again, most of these cards started utilizing the first type of artwork available at that period of time, and some people used them to actually use it as almost like a card game. And we started seeing that major advertising on cigarette packs, and it was mostly to protect the product of cigarettes, not necessarily the card collecting. You weren't people out there trying to get complete sets and going online to try to find cards, but primarily to protect the tobacco products. This is from 1888, the Godwin Champions. Again, a very different type of photography. Anyone out there that are photography experts at all, some people will collect cards just because of the photography, not necessarily the baseball aspects of it. As we kind of go through 1900, 1920, most of the cards, again, were the tobacco and confectionery. 1903 was the very first major set of the 20th century, issued by Bryce and Williams. It was a confectionery company in Pennsylvania. And then we started to see several more other companies starting to advertising and putting together more of a series of players as part of a set. And one of the major was American Tobacco Company, American Caramel Company. There was also a Cabana, which is a Cuba cigar manufacturer. And a lot of these cards, the American Caramel cards, had various backs, and these are some pictures I pulled up. A lot of times they just had the player's last name, the position, and the team, Chicago, American League. And the backs, they did not have statistics on the back. It's basically, and they call them subjects, not cards. Baseball series, 100 subjects. And they had different backs. So there are some serious collectors out there that only collect certain backs because some of these have 16 to 23 different variations of backs. So you have the same front picture with a different back. So there's people out there that only want certain backs, which is quite interesting, and they will pay pretty good sized money for these cards. Again, this is a classic Allen and Ginter. It was another series that was issued. Neat about these sets is that they also, besides baseball players, had animals, had circus characters, it had inventors. It was kind of a it wasn't just baseball. Again, here's another one here. This is an old mill background. You can see the different backs. This is from the Texas Southern, Virginia Southern Leagues. Again, just very interesting, the cards. Some of these older cards, quite interesting, since the photography was not there. A lot of times they would have a guy swinging at a ball, and they would literally have to have a ball of string hanging from the ceiling for the photography, because if they took the picture with the ball falling or swinging, it would be all blurred. So the camera, the photography was quite different at that time. Anybody familiar with that card to the right at all? Okay. Okay. What position did he play? Very good. And obviously he played for the Pittsburgh Pirates, Hall of Famer. And we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about him a little bit later. I want to bring the effect that the American card catalog was a very important part of the card collecting history. Anybody familiar with Jefferson Burdick at all? Heard of his name? He was a pioneer in terms of trying to organize all of the cards, because there were so many different series, to put it in some type of catalog, kind of like a library catalog. So when I do these presentations at libraries, they have different catalogs to find books. Well, he did it for the card collection. He had an unbelievable collection. Dated the early cards all the way up to like 1951, almost had every card, and at least one. And a lot of his cards are actually at the New York Metropolitan Art Museum. So if you've ever been there, you'll see some of the Burdick collection there. It's absolutely unbelievable. I've not been there personally. I've talked to some of the dealers and collectors that go there, and they just are awed by the collection. One of the very first cards that came out that was really what we call the monster, the T206, and that's where the series, the Wagner card, came out of. It was an unbelievable set. The cards were generally on the smaller size of not your typical baseball card size that we have today, but smaller. And this was produced over a 3-year period. Approximately had 524 different players, a lot of Hall of Famers, 76 Hall of Famers. And again, this one had 16 different backs. So this is really quite the magical set, the T206 series from that year era. And these are just some pictures of that particular series. You can see the condition I was able to pull up. You can see Ty Cobb over here with the Tigers. And kind of interesting, what number did Ty Cobb wear with the Tigers? Anybody know? 10-11. You guys are a good crowd. All right, I'm pleased. And quite interesting, we can see some of the photographer here of those particular players. Just to give you a quick snapshot of some of the cards of that area and some of the poses and action pictures. We're going to talk about the Honus Wagner card, literally the rarest, most expensive card in the world. We're literally called the Holy Grail of baseball cards. Again, he was kind of like the Derek Jeter we have today, very well known, very well recognized. Won 8 batting titles. I mean, the guy could steal bases and really was one of the original players in the Hall of Fame. Well, one thing he did not like was what? What did he like? Tobacco, that's correct. So he advertised in some of the other products, but he was against smoking. And the card company actually went ahead and printed some cards, and he was quite upset about it, and he had enough value that he was going to sue the card manufacturers to stop printing these cards. So he was able to stop the presses, literally. Some of them were printed, and actually they were printed in Virginia, and there's actually a factory stamp on these cards. About 200 actually were printed, but over 57 or so were distributed out to the public. Now, through the years, cards have been found occasionally, so you'll hear notices once in a while. We'll talk about some of the recent values and what they've been selling for. But in 1933, a card sold for about $50. Well, in 2000, one card sold for $145,000. And this is kind of a lot of information here, but in 2007, we had almost a near mint condition card sold for $2.8 million, and that actually was purchased by the owner of the Arizona Diamondbacks, 2007. In 2008, one sold for $950,000. Kind of interesting story here. In 2010, a card actually was donated to the School Sisters of Notre Dame in Baltimore, and it actually sold for $262,000. It was kind of interesting. It had a note in there that was handwritten, when's the last time you wrote a handwritten note, right? Although damaged, the value of this baseball card should increase exponentially throughout the 21st century. That was kind of neat. April of just this past year, there was a very large collection where the Wagner card sold for $1.23 million. This was quite the auction. Anyone familiar with online auctions at all? Familiar with eBay? Some of the larger sports card collections will go to a specialty auction house, Goodwin and Company. There was another one that was for the All-Star game recently, where it's strictly memorabilia, and you'll have the high rollers there. I was in San Francisco for a show, and they had an actual jersey of Willie Mays. It sold for over $25,000, and it was actually a jersey Willie Mays wore back in the 50s. But some of the high cards will go, and some of this auction really had some really neat cards. One's an Eddie Plank card that was short printed, very hard to find. And also they had Ty Cobb, Christy Math. I mean, it sold for almost $1.8 million in that particular auction. We're going to keep continuing here. So that was kind of neat stuff here, right? So in the years after that, we started seeing even some more companies come out. American Caramel produced the Zenith. Collins McCarthy issued some cards. Sporting News Magazine issued some cards. So there was a lot of different cards out there. So I'm going to pass out a price guide a little bit later, but you can go through there and you can see all the different card companies that produced cards in this era of that was not, and this was again, Mr. Burdick was keeping track of all this. I mean, God bless him, he's doing all that. So, caramel companies, there was also the Cracker Jacks. Remember the traditional Cracker Jack cards? They had a series, and they actually were very popular. Great card from a picture perspective, and I'll show you some photos here. But it also had some Federal League players. So these are the guys that actually could not play in the major leagues. For example, one of them is shoeless Joe Jackson. And what team did he play for in the American League? White Sox, and he was involved with some kind of scandal, 1919. So he played in the Federal League, and I've got a picture of him. This was a really great set. There's some serious collectors out there that all they collect is Cracker Jack cards. Pretty amazing. Really a neat set if you have an opportunity. There's also an album available as well. These are just some of the cards again. These are American Caramel. Cy Young, of course, holds the all-time record for most wins for a pitcher. Here's the Cracker Jack cards. Here's that Joe Jackson showing here with Cleveland. And you can see some of the other cards as well. Really a nice photography. Cracker Jack cards, very popular back in that era. Through 1920, 1930, of course, we had World War I, really curtailed baseball card production, and really the war effort was the main focus. But actually, it kind of lulled a little bit after the war, until they're trying to get the country up and going again. So there's very few cards produced. We started seeing some of these, what they call strip cards. If you see any of these strip cards, they have 4 or 5 cards in a strip panel. They're very hard to find in a complete strip. If you have any of those, they can be worth hundreds up to thousands of dollars. I mean, they're pretty neat if you see a complete strip of cards from that era. 1921, there was these postcards that were issued by Exhibit Supply Company. Great photography, in more of like kind of opposing pictures, but the material was on a hard card stock, so it really has held through the test of time, and they produced these cards for about 40 years. So you have some people that have, that's all, again, what they collect is just the exhibit cards. American Caramel then came back in the market a little bit. York Caramel had some cards that were involved with ice cream. And then, interesting enough, Great Depression hit. You know, this was obviously quite significant in American history as well as the economy. And so really after the Depression and the start of the war, then we really started to see production soar. Baseball really started to take off once the economy started going. The 32 Caramel set was really the first one, but the Gaudy Comes series was really one of the major card sets. Anybody have any Gaudy cards at all? I've got one here. It's actually from 1934, and we call that a common. So he's not, it's not Lou Gehrig or anything like that. It's Frank Gruby, and I'm just going to pass that around. The condition is a little bit rough. It's probably about a $50 value, but it's kind of neat. It's from 1934. Really a neat set. 240 cards were in that series. Had the Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig cards. I'm going to show you some pictures a little bit later. But some really a nice set, well produced, well distributed. Another series, Diamond Stars, came out. I have a friend of mine that's collecting these cards right now in the Buffalo area. He's only needing, I think, 7 for the complete set. We were at a show in Cleveland, the National Card Show, and he bought about 4 cards for about $1,200 just to get those certain cards for the series. And then we started until we got to World War II. And these are just some of the pictures of the Gaudy. Of course, Babe Ruth on the right, who was my dad's favorite player. The Lou Gehrig on the left. Kind of a nice classic drawing photos, as we say. Again, we're more into drawing, not necessarily the photography, so things have changed a little bit, but we're starting more of the drawing. These are the Diamond Stars here. Again, we talked through them, and they also have variations to those as well. There's some people that have different variations. There's green and also blue backs, so beware of that. Then we, obviously World War II, and really nothing really happened for card producing. Because obviously we're trying, it was definitely the war effort. I mean, it was definitely very serious, and there's much more things important. I think one of the things to realize that baseball was still going on. It was the topic at that time, should we still have sports? Should we just not even have it anymore? But I think I think people sometimes need a relief of sports and entertainment. Unfortunately, maybe just get the mind off even for a couple of hours of what things were going around the world. These are some of the earlier cards from that era that came after the war. Some leaf cards here in the bottom. And we see kind of a combination drawing and a photography picture, and some of the black and white ones. Of course, that's Yogi Bear on the right. And I literally call these the golden years, from 1948 all the way up to 1980, that you'll see some of the really beautiful cards produced and it was quite interesting. Bowman actually was the very first series to issue. Anyone have any Bowman cards? I have a very few. Really neat cards from a collector perspective. And the Leaf Candy Company, which is on the bottom. Again, nothing with Topps yet. And Topps is the big lion just waiting to get into the marketplace. And again, these are some more additional cards. Nice photography. Kind of a lot of times you just see the drawing. Some were printed sideways. Just had the player's first name. There was no holograms or anything like on these cards. And Bowman, again, was the major producer from 1948 to 1952. Really neat cards. I mean, the history of these cards are unbelievable. Anybody familiar with this player here on the bottom left? That's right, Mickey Mantle. His rookie card, 1952 Topps. Interesting, actually, his first card actually was from the 1951 set. But Topps really hit the home run market, home run literally, with this set. This was their very first year. One of the reasons Leaf stopped producing cards. But the 52 series is 407 cards. It is absolutely unbelievable. And it was the first year that cards had the emblem on of the team, the player's first name, and then a facsimile autograph. So that was really innovative at that period of time. And the photography, I mean, the classic pose here, Mickey Mantle, is just, you know, young Mickey Mantle, and obviously being in New York and the popularity that he had. And, you know, one of those few players that play on one team. I mean, there was one player that recently retired from the Atlanta Braves. Do you know who that player is? Chipper Jones. So there's only a few, if you think about it, that play an entire career with one team. Mickey Mantle is one of them, Cal Ripken. Of course, Stan Musial, Roberto Clemente, I believe, was all Pirates. But there are very few. Of course, with free agents, things have changed quite significantly. But if you're well liked, and you know, and you have a great following, as long as you produce, you'll stay on the team. But Bowman, kind of interesting, Topps got quite wealthy on the 52 series, and literally bought out Bowman. You know, they basically said, you know, we're just going to buy you, because a lot of these contract players were starting to, you know, should I sign a Bowman contract or should I sign with Topps? Topps was a new guy in place, and basically Topps enjoyed a monopoly for about 2 decades. Literally, in the entire, they were the only card company to produce major sets. Literally a stranglehold on the players' contracts, no competition, and literally a monopoly. And so we started seeing Topps issue complete sets for about 600 cards, and they'd be put out in different series. So they have Series 1 of about 132 cards, and they had Series 2, Series 3, about 600 cards, about 100 cards per series on average. And what's kind of interesting, if you have some of these older cards, you want to have cards that have high numbers because they were printed less. So the old supply and demand. So if you have some high number cards from these particular series from the 50s and 60s and early 70s, they're quite valuable. Interesting enough, Topps had 5 or 6 cards for a nickel. That was the way the cost was. And also 1 card packs. And again, I took just some pictures of that. Here's an LK line up in the upper right. A nice card here with the TVs on the right. That was, and also Lou Burdett, kind of, he was a right-handed pitcher, but he's posing as a left-handed. Do I have it the other way around? Kind of interesting. That was from the 1959 series. Nice Willie Mays there in the front here. And they actually had some nice, you know, sliding pictures as well. And there's a Mantle card. But just some of the classic cards that ever were produced were in the 50s. Kind of going a little bit ahead here, now we're starting to see that monopoly, but then we're starting to see some of the regional sets come across. So now you're starting to see Post had some cereal cards, used to be the back of cereal boxes. I don't know if you remember any of those at all. Those are kind of neat. Unfortunately, the cardboard sometimes through time would lose the paper of the actual player on the card. Also, Milk Duds produced a card. Interesting enough, Fleer issued a card series, and they signed Ted Williams to a nice contract, exclusive contract for Ted Williams, very popular. Again, they had cards of him, but then also they had retired players from 1959, and they were kind of neat cards, but they just weren't very popular. And kind of interesting also, they also sold their cards with a cherry cookie. I mean, that was kind of interesting, not gum, but a cookie. But most of it was, the players were contractually to Topps. Kind of interesting, Fleer had a picture of Honus Wagner, and he was in his, probably in his mid-60s at the time, chewing tobacco on the actual card. So that was kind of interesting. Again, here's the postcards here from the early 60s. Here's Topps started licensing cards in Canada from the OPC, and you can tell by the French backing. Here's a Nolan Ryan card from 1971. Kind of interesting. I mean, there was some Topps cards, or OPC, but not very distributed very well. Being up here, you'd probably get more of those OPC cards, let's say that if you were in Kansas or something. Also, bottle caps. The players started to make their own deals with different manufacturers of products to likeness, so they can get some additional money. They weren't getting the money that they are getting now. And basically, they were on these Coca-Cola bottle caps. Fleer started to get into the courts and said, you know what, this is a monopoly, we're going to break this up. took it to court. This is a lot of legal here. I just want to emphasize this was something that was going in the background, obviously very unbeknownst a lot of times to collectors. It wasn't the media coverage as we have now. Fleer had a chance to pursue further legal action, but instead, you know what, they gave up and said, we're just going to sell you the remaining contracts for $395,1966. And this is again the monopolies of the 60s. You may recognize some of these cards. Nice Johnny Bench rookie card from the 1968 series. That's very popular here in Michigan, of course, with the Tigers winning the World Series in '68. There are some people that just collect 68 Tiger cards, your Mickey Lolages and Gates Brown. But just kind of remember these were the only card companies produced, and if you have the late series of these cards, they are worth more than the first or second series. So some of the late series can produce a nice value. Here, back in the 70s here, we started seeing again, 67, and this is one from the mid-70s here, John Madlock. You can see that he doesn't have the logo on his hat, so that was part of if you notice that even the bottle caps didn't have the logo on the hat. So some of the players we started to, the Players Association was gaining some strength, trying to it was such a monopoly, the players were not able to move, and really the ownership had the upper hand in terms of dealings with the players. Marvin Miller was hired, and then basically he was trying to get Fleer exclusive contracts. Fleer had another window of opportunity to print cards, decided they declined. And also one of the popular cards, again, some cards from the 1970s of Cincinnati Reds. Bobby Tolan was kind of an interesting player. 1970s, and this is primarily the most of the time when I was collecting. One of the very first cards I got was a card of Denny McLain, of all people, 1970. This was the 3D card, so this is one from 1972. This is a Glenn Becker card. If you remember the 3D cards at all from Kellogg's, used to be in the cereal. And very neat set. And it was really neat because they had the full logos on it. It was kind of that 3D plastic. They're very hard to find in perfect or mint condition because of the plastic. It would crack over a period of time. So if you have some of these cards from the early 70s, 3Ds are quite valuable if they're in mint condition or really good shape. The 71 series, which is this Roberto Clemente card, the only time you can get the whole set is to buy the cereal. All the other years, you can send away for the complete set for about $4 and a couple of box tops. The 71 series is the only one here that you can get. The only way you can get the whole set of them is buying Raisin Bran and Corn Flakes, so kind of painful. Also, Hostess had a nice card. They used to be back of Twinkies as well, so they also had a kind of a neat set, but never really took off. And again, Hostess, you would have problems with the actual cake inside the package and rub off on the cards, and you'd have to cut off the cards off the packages. Kind of interesting. Topps literally only paid $125 for a player's contract, and then they actually increased it up to $500. This started in 1973. Year 1973 produced the first set with, there was no series. It was all one series. So you can buy a box, a pack of cards. You can get card number 1, you can get card all the way up to 660. So that was quite a innovation, I guess. There was a nice set issued in 76 that had the logos and everything, but it was very poorly distributed. I have some of those cards in my own collection. Just never really took off. It was kind of a losing proposition per se. Finally, we started seeing some competition. Now, this is where things started to change in the card business. Fleer basically sued Topps. Fleer produced in the early 70s kind of like cards that had drawings on them with little logos of the teams and everything with gum. But they started, you know what, we're getting made enough money off that, we're going to take the courts on and actually beat Topps or won the lawsuit. So 1981 was the very first year you actually had 3 different card companies, Fleer, Donruss, and Topps, that produced full sets. The first, kind of interesting, Donruss and Fleer first issued cards with gum, Then Topps went back and said, you know what, we want to be the only company to sell with gum. So then Fleer and Donruss then did not put gum with their packs. Turned out to be quite the, you know how things work for certain reasons. Well, that actually fueled the industry of the cards, because remember, if you ever had cards, they used to have these gum stains on the back of the cards. You would have a nice card, you have this gum stain from the gum, you know. So kind of interesting. So in '84, Donruss really hit a home run with the '84 set. I have a nice collection of that. Really a great set. It has a Don Mattingly rookie card, even a Roger Clemens. Really a nice set. But we started to see what we call overproduction. And this really started really like in 1984 as we started seeing the first price guides. And I'm going to pass out a couple of them. This is the first time, no, this is the newer one from 2011, so it's not really new, but it's new enough, where it has Dr. Beckett actually started producing these books and price guides for people who could then look at the value of their card collections. So kind of neat, and he actually was really innovative in getting interest in card collecting. So I remember going to the card store and get the latest price guide and see what my Mike Schmidt is going for. So I'm just going to pass that around. The guide has expanded quite significantly through the years, but this really started, we started to see some of the card shops, the card collecting hobby really took off in the late 80s. We had shops. And also, and I think part of it too is we started seeing more and more people travel for their jobs. They just didn't stay in Detroit, Michigan or Chicago. We started seeing some of the individuals, people working, going in different crosses of the country. And I think that also helped the card industry expand, because now you can go to Los Angeles and go to a card shop and buy your Tiger cards, for example. So there was starting to see some of the trading. The dealers would trade across the country, and this is not through the internet, literally writing checks and mailing things through the regular post office. And then we started seeing a lot of card shops. I don't know if you remember any card shops. There used to be one up here in Rochester. When I was in Buffalo, we had a lot of different card shops around the area. But I got to the point where they were going up everywhere. And this is, again, before the internet. This is how you would get some cards and so on. But we really started seeing a major overproduction starting around 1985. Kind of interesting too, Topps, the actual cards they were producing were very, very poor in quality. In the mid 80s and low 80s, the Topps pictures weren't very good, the stats weren't very good. You get them, we started seeing some really good competition, bringing the quality up, and Topps really was starting to really strike out, literally, and he's overproduced the cards. Now here's a card from just 1988, literally not worth very much. I mean, you'd be lucky if someone pays you to get it off your hands. And we also had Score issued some cards as well, but there was just an overproduction of cards that was quite significant in the mid-'80s. Big series here is, you're familiar with this player here? Ken Griffey Jr. This is his rookie card from Upper Deck, and this was really a big move in the 1989. And Upper Deck entered the marketplace, and I remember this significantly. These cards came out, and he was the young phenom, a son of Ken Griffey, who played with the Cincinnati Reds at the Big Red Machine with Johnny Bench and George Foster and the like, Pete Rose, for example. But Griffey came out. Upper Deck was the first series to sign Ken Griffey Jr. to pretty much an exclusive contract with Upper Deck in terms of his very first card. And again, great photograph of him. Innovative because it had a hologram in the back, but a pack sold for 99 cents. And this was like, 23 years ago, but I remember that. It was like, oh my gosh, 99 cents. It was a foiled wrapper, had no gum in it, but the card quality and the picture photography was absolutely outstanding. I've got some, these came out in let's see if I still have one. But the card quality, here's just from here's just a sample, 1990. Here's 93 series, or 92 series, pass that around. But just the card itself, it has a hologram in the back. They made a lot of them in 92, 91, 90, and so on. But innovative, Topps really generated interest in the hobby and really forced Topps some backpedaling. You really didn't know what to do. They brought back the old Bowman name, but we really started seeing these overproduction. I try to emphasize this based upon the stacks of cards here because I have many of these that aren't worth anything, unfortunately, because they printed so many. But basically, we started to see so many different brands and sets come out that I had friends of mine that literally stopped collecting. They just couldn't keep up with it. But it was really a busy time in the early 90s. Again, overproduction. And again, this is a lot here. But as a collector, this was very frustrating because you're used to always just having one series and that would be it. Well, now you had so many different cards set coming out, you couldn't even keep up with it, let alone put the collection together. We had parallel sets, we had diamond, gold foil accent cards. I mean, it got to the point where it was just very difficult to keep up with the collection. Premium cards, nice photography and everything, innovation, but it was very expensive. We just couldn't keep up with it. It's just some of the things that are happening in baseball. 94, of course, was the baseball strike, right? That was the first year of the World Series, wasn't even played. But then 95 really saved the day. The gentleman on the right, of course, Cal Ripken, right? Consecutive games. That really helped, I think, the sport kind of get back on its feet after the 94. He broke the record in September of 95. That game was on ESPN. Very memorable game. Actually, he had a home run in that game, which was interesting. But then we started seeing this collectible insert. And I kind of put a rough era on this. This is 1997. Nomar Garcia Pirate played with the Red Sox. We started to see card companies now get innovative in their selling techniques and actually started buying bats, balls, jerseys, cut them up, shaved bats, and put them in the actual card. So now you have the actual history of players and so on in these insert cards. It started probably in the mid-90s. And we started seeing that. So the one that's going around there is actually part of his bat. It's quite interesting because you get maybe one per box of cards. There's some people that all they do is collect insert cards. I mean, now that's what they do is just collect. They want Justin Verlander, they just want insert cards. And now they got autograph versions, they've got all kinds of things going on. But it started in 97. Upper Deck, and this is what we're going to talk about again. Upper Deck was one of the first companies that did this, also we started seeing these short printed cards. Again, it was very hard to keep up with everything. And then, of course, 98. This was a very popular time, of course, with Sosa and Mark McGwire, right, going after the home run record. Of course, we know now how that all happened, or potentially how that all happened. It wasn't really, unfortunately, not the real deal in terms of them enhancing themselves. But at that time, it was very popular. I mean, when they would play and you were hoping, who you're going to root for, and they seemed like really two good guys. This was in 98 again. I think it's helped spur the hobby. Kind of interesting that 94, people say, well, how do the card companies do? Well, when they had the strike, most of the card companies already made their money when they produced all the cards before the strike. So the Topps and the like still were able to make their money even though they had no World Series in 1994. Then we got 97. I have, again, that rough year. We started seeing the internet and called the explosion of the internet. And this is where we really started to see a change of the retail shops were really starting to go out of business. To have a storefront, you have to pay rent, you got to pay taxes. And then with the internet, and we're going to go through this a little bit today about eBay, it really changed the mindset of how people buy and sell cards today. We also started to see less of the card shows. They used to have sometimes 2 or 3 card shows in one weekend. I mean, when I lived in Buffalo, we had one in Niagara Falls, we had one in Buffalo, and they were only 20 miles away. So it was kind of a drain on these dealers to set up their cards and so on. And we started to see some of the card shows go out of business. And then in 98, we started seeing some of the companies go out of business, the actual card companies. Some of these cards that were produced were, and I'm just going to surpass some cards here. Some of these are most the same player, but similar, just a lot of cards at that time. Also, I want to pass out, here's a 1996 Topps issue. These are some reprints of Mickey Mantle, again, a way to try to get people to buy their cards. So they would put a Mickey Mantle facsimile card, a reprint. So sometimes you may see a card and, wow, this may be valuable. Well, it should say reprint on the back. So be aware of that. But we started seeing some companies go out of business in 1998. 05, Fleer actually went bankrupt, and then Fleer bought them, or Upper Deck bought them out. And Upper Deck actually made cards with the Fleer name after it. So this is, we started to see just a lot of different companies kind of shifting around, trying to get market share. But Major League Baseball said, you know what, this is enough. This is getting painful. I think they were getting complaints even from their major dealers across the country. They had to do something, so they said, you know what, we're going to limit the number of card companies to produce cards. So they only gave the actual licenses for Topps and Upper Deck only to produce cards. So Score was out of business at that time, and so there's only two major card companies. What's kind of interesting is they still produce the different card names, Fleer, Bowman, with a different, so they were still producing a lot of different card sets. It just, there was only two card companies. So as a collector, you really didn't see much of a difference in terms of still we're seeing a tremendous amount of sets out there. Again, Upper Deck purchased the Fleer brand, and then they continued to issue products with the Fleer name back in 2006. And again, Bowman. Also, Topps is one of the only card company to produce a factory set. You ever seen these factory sets? Maybe at Target, you can buy the whole set for about $40 to $50. Actually, today I had some 2012 Series 1 complete set, so it's 330 cards. So right now, the way that Topps does it, they have three series. They've got Series 1, Series 2, each have 330 cards, and there's an update set that comes out now. So actually there's an update set that's just coming out. But generally the factory set will only have the first two series of cards. So some people just buy the factory set just to keep up with their collection of sets, for example, or if the child was born in 2000, they just want to start sets from 2000 all the way up till now. So kind of a neat thing. But now we go back, let's see here, we're going to go here. Another interesting factor, just a side note, a lot of people, well, there's another area of cards, again, marketing. They had these e-cards, or electronic cards. So actually these are cards you would bid online through the card websites, and you would, win the auction for, let's say, $20, and they actually would store the card for you. You don't even have to have it shipped to your house. Have them store it in perfect conditions, and then you can always resell it or re-auction it off, or just have it delivered to your house. Just another marketing opportunity and technique. A lot of people just want to get access to those websites so they can sell advertising. So that's another way, just like anything else we see nowadays. Also, the rookie card, you can see a little RC on this card. Cards, the very first player or first card of that certain player was considered its rookie cards. A lot of them are a little bit more valuable than the typical regular card. Again, it's supply and demand. So back when there was a large explosion of cards, rookie card really doesn't matter because they made so many of them. So they kind of put a new guideline to try to, so if you see one with an RC, then you know that's his actual rookie card, and it has to be on a major league roster. That was the other topic there as well. Kind of interesting card here in 2007. Topps issued a card of Derek Jeter, right? The Yankees, very popular player, very popular card, but kind of interesting. If you recognize any of the people there, you see some gentleman standing up waving. That's George Bush, and then in the dugout there's Mickey Mantle over here. So kind of interesting, and I remember when this first came out, this was like a frenzy at the Taylor Card Show of trying to, and these cards were going for about $15 to $20 for this particular card, and then to find out that it was just more of a marketing hoax just to get people to buy the cards. Kind of interesting. I'm going to, what Topps has done is they have really recognized Mickey Mantle as kind of the spokesperson for Topps. So every year, and I'm going to pass this set around, but every year number 7, Mickey Mantle, they actually make a Mickey Mantle card every year of their basic set. So if you get a Topps set, you'll see a card number 7, it's going to be a Mickey Mantle. So it's kind of a tribute to Mickey Mantle, but also it was really helped Topps get where they are today. How are we doing on time? We're doing good? Okay, good. Kind of an interesting card. You can buy these for about $2 to $3. We're going to go on eBay here a little bit to see what they're actually selling for. That happened in 2007. 2010, Topps then was awarded the only card company to issue cards. So they gave the licensing to produce the cards for Major League Baseball to have all the logos. What's kind of interesting, Upper Deck decided, you know what, we're just going to produce the cards anyway. They're going to show the players kind of going like this so you don't see the name in front or the emblem on their hat. Well, some of these cards you can see that it says the Tiger logo or something. So they got caught and had to pay $4 million worth of damages. And really Upper Deck is out of the Major League Baseball card business right now with the logos, and Topps is the only card company. And it kind of goes back to now they're the monopoly again. They're the only card company to produce baseball cards is Topps. Upper Deck is almost bankrupt. I mean, they're producing some other cards, but not the baseball cards. Series 1, which I have passed out, that's the complete set. And then Series 2 came out, there's a typo there, came out in June, and they're going to have a updated set that's out now. So that's what's happening in Topps and on the current cards. Any questions so far? Just kind of going right through? Good? Okay. Yes, sir?
Yeah, if I could ever find it, I think I might have Mickey Mantle's rookie card. What's that worth now?
So a mint card can go as many as $30,000 to $40,000. If you've got one in relatively good value, we can get $4,000 to $5,000 for it, $3,500. I've seen them $2,700. I was in an auction in Ann Arbor. It sold for $4,200. So it was really condition specific. It was interesting. It was actually double printed. So sometimes when they printed these card sheets, they'd have some players actually printed on several card sheets. But since he was so popular, and of course, back in the 50s, the card conditions, people used to put in the spokes of their bikes, right? Or else they used to, or flip them against a wall. I remember doing that. You flip them against a wall, and if the card landed a certain way, higher than the other ones, almost like horseshoes, you'd get the whole pot of cards. And then I have all these nice cards, but they'll have rubbed corners. So it really does vary, but again, you might have a nice card there depending on the condition. You do have to watch out for counterfeits. That's something you got to be careful about. Anything you buy, if it's art or anything like that, is this the real? If you're kind of like Antique Roadshow,
Expert come in and verify that it's the real card?
Yeah, well, what I've got a magnifying glass, and I've got several price guides. Actually, will give you guidance of about if it's a real card or not. I mean, and we sometimes struggle with the technology out today of some of these older cards, because there's people out there that are pretty smart of how to work the system with photography and even make it look like it's older and damaged. But you can literally tell a lot of times by the thickness of the card stock. That's a giveaway. Also the printing quality, and as well as some of the finer point. You'll see some imperfections of cards where if it's on the printing, which happened back a long time ago, where in the newer, if it's a reprint or someone that's a counterfeit card, you'll see the print almost too precise, not how it was back many years ago. So those are kind of areas, but a lot of time, and then you need to talk to that person who you're buying it from. How did you get that card? Where did you get it from? And if you know them, of course, but if you don't know them, you really need to talk to them, especially if you're willing to pay big money for these cards, because it's quite challenging out there. You can send your card away for grading services, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. These are just ways to buy cards, go to a card show. Usually there's one here in Michigan, Taylor, Mount Clemens, once a month. A great opportunity, and it's a great time to buy cards right now, just by the way the economy is going. Online auctions, we're going to talk this with eBay. Real estate sales, occasionally you'll come across a box of cards of significant value. A lot of times it's quite the disappointment. Feel like I got some cards, and then it's, you know, cards that are commons. And also, occasionally flea markets and garage sales, we've got to be aware of that. If they're flea markets, sometimes they're outside, you got windy conditions, the condition of cards, you got sun degradation, you got to be careful of outdoor shows and selling of cards. You have sometimes some people have some really great looking cards, and then they got the degradation of the sun, kind of like a painting, you know, on a wall. And also the typical garage sales you might be able to find. This is some of the things, the price guides. We talked about the Beckett. That is a pretty in-depth book. This one here is a Sports Collector Digest. Man, this is like a War and Peace. Has a lot of cards that aren't in the Beckett guide. So a lot of times if I'm appraising a collection, or I'm at a show and they see, you know, they come across with some odd card that I don't even know what it is. Sometimes I will find that in this publication. And through the years, if you're familiar with any type of publications, some don't even get reprinted like the following year, because there's literally so many cards and collectibles out there. I'll talk about the grade carding services. You can send your card out to be graded, and normally it's about, I'm going to pass this. This is a reprint card of Babe Ruth from '76. But you could send out a card for grading, and literally it goes to a company and they will computer scan it, put it in an encased hard plastic case with a barcode on it, and we'll give it a rating. 10 is a perfect card, perfect centerized, perfect corners, color and everything else, and then it can go all the way down to a 1. So if you've got a very valuable card of collection, you can mail it out to a grading company. Beckett is one grading company, and they actually will, you pay about $10, and you can, at times, if you can get a high enough graded card, you can get as much as 30-40% more if you would sell a non-graded card. Typically, personally, I'm not a real big graded person. Graded cards, I really don't. I'd rather have the card in its normal state. These cases take a lot of space, and then you're paying $10. Sometimes they'll give you a coupon, you get one for $5, and sometimes one for nothing, and then you get the next one. Also, be realized of the local markets. Obviously, here in Michigan, you can find a lot of Tiger stuff. So the pricing might be good, but then people will be willing to pay more. So it really varies from market to market. Of course, if I'm in Chicago, I'm probably easier to pay for a Tiger card. I'm just not going to have as much of a selection of Tiger memorabilia and cards if you were here in Michigan, where most of the Tiger fans are very knowledgeable and been around a long time, a lot of passion. And then national markets, they've got the national show. It's called the National. And it's once a year, and it's usually in Chicago or Cleveland, and it's a very big show, literally thousands of tables. You have to be there like all day, sometimes 2 or 3 days at a time. I was in Cleveland, and it's just so much. It's a card show on steroids in terms of the number of tables. One thing here before we get in the eBay is sports memorabilia. The one I passed around, you can see it was certified of Garcia Parra's card, for example. Sometimes people have letters, signed letters of Warren Spahn or certain players. Very interesting. And knowing your source, so who you're buying some of these things from. Even on the internet, autographs, there's a lot of fake autographs out there. Just a brief overview, very similar on the other sports, hockey, basketball, and football. Same time frames in terms of the cycle, late 80s, early 90s, overproduction of cards. Things have down to where they only got one manufacturer of cards. Hockey just increased it to 2, but now we have this lockout going on, so I don't know what that's going to do from a card perspective for hockey. That's going to be not good for some of the local dealers here in the hockey areas. Basketball is very tough. The older basketball are popular, but the newer basketball, it's kind of painful out there from an investment perspective. I almost want to have you stay away from it because it's really not much of a demand as football. And football is very popular, especially in the Ohio area. They love their football in Ohio and Texas on the cards. That's my time and interest.